Welcome to the LibreQuest podcast. My name is Matt. This is episode 50, and today I'm joined by Linux enthusiast, Linux gamer, and content creator Ryan of Intelligent Gaming. How's it going?
Absolutely brilliant, actually. If you hear me making a noise sipping a bit, I've got my water bottle here because it's a bit warm in the UK at the moment, which makes a change because it's either going to be warm when it's raining or raining when it's not raining, basically. It rains a lot in the UK is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. But it's good to be here, what I'm saying anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun talking to you because my first question for you is really about, you create a lot of tutorials on how to set up distributions specifically for gaming, and you also do a lot of gaming content. And I think that really helps a lot of people understand what they can expect when they're gaming on Linux and how they can best utilize the system for gaming. So kind of my first question to you is, do you feel comfortable, like if you meet someone who is gaming on Windows machine, would you feel comfortable recommending to them to move over to Linux for their gaming platform?
It really depends on what games they play. If it's someone that's into battle royale games or any form of competitive multiplayer game, then I'd probably say no, simply because support for things such as EAC, BattleEye, and all these kernel advantage cheats is just not there, so they would have a horrible time if they moved across. That being said, if they're into games such as single-player games, role-playing games, that kind of thing, or even a couple of fighter games, something that's not really multiplayer-based, then I'd say to them, yeah, certainly give it a try, but just bear in mind you may need to do some form of tinkering in order to get some games to work. But it's certainly getting better, but I'd never say it's a like-for-like experience. I'd say gaming on Linux is an alternative, similar to, I suppose you could say, a console experience. Like, for example, if you had a PlayStation, you wouldn't expect to get an Xbox game, stick it in, hope it works. So I think Linux gaming is up to a point where it'll work for the vast majority of people. But if they've got stuff that relies on basic technology that isn't supported under Wine or any form of compatibility layer, then no, in that case, I would not recommend they would use Linux.
Okay.
Not for gaming anyway.
And is there like a list of games that you know of, like that you're aware of that just don't work right now?
Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG. What else is I think some of the Call of Duties, especially the modern ones. Now, I don't think they actually don't run because of the anti-cheat. I think there's probably some DRM involved in there as well. Some games are a bit finicky when it comes to external launches. So at one point, if you had a game that you bought through Steam that had Origin originally, so for example, something like Dragon Age Inquisition, that was originally an exclusive to Origin, but that's now been brought back to Steam. The game will load, but sometimes Origin's a bit funny when it runs through Wine, especially when there's an update. You've obviously had the Mass Effect trilogy being re-released. That's a weird one because you buy the game through Steam, you install it using Origin, but then you've got a third launcher on top of that. And in order for that to work, you need to use a custom version of Proton called Glorious Eggroll's Proton GE. But yeah, again, if it's a game that doesn't require some form of kernel advantage cheat, certain types of DRM or external launchers, I'd probably say you're probably good to go. What I'd recommend you do beforehand, however, is just make a list of what you want to play. And if you find that the vast majority of stuff doesn't work, then, that's fine. Stick with Windows 10. It's absolutely fine for a gaming platform. I'd be a hypocrite to suggest don't use Windows 10 because I use it all the time, especially for multiplayer games. But you can also check out Proton DB, which is a community website which will tell you exactly what people experience when they try and run games through Proton. Just don't rely too much on the ratings because a lot of the time it's out of date. Just read the reports, and if the vast majority of people say it works, then you'll probably find it's going to work. So that's my advice if you want to give gaming on Linux a try.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, the Proton DB is a really great resource. I actually use that one too. If I'm considering picking up a game on Steam, I usually go check Proton DB just to make sure, because you never know if you're going to spend money on a title and not have it work on your system. That's kind of frustrating. Of course, they usually do pretty good on their refund policy. And honestly, there's been a few times when I haven't checked it and I've had to do a refund myself. But Proton DB is a great resource if you're getting into Linux gaming. So I wanted to ask you also, Have you had any experience? Because I know there's some titles that just aren't going to work on Linux, but there is GPU pass-through and virtualization. Have you tried any, messed around with that at all?
No, it's something to do on my to-do list, but I know you can do what's known as single GPU pass-through. Historically, you'd had to use two separate discrete graphics cards in order to achieve the same effect, but it is possible. The only downside, depending on what type of GPU you've got, for example, if you've got an AMD GPU, I understand that there's some form of reboot bug where once you close the VM, you have to restart your system to gain access back to your Linux operating system. I don't know if that was patched, but I know that was at one point an issue. NVIDIA side of things doesn't suffer from that as such. So you can set up a single GPU pass-through with NVIDIA hardware. But depending on how old the hardware is, you may need to apply a custom firmware fix, which some people may not want to do. Personally, I stick with the dual boot option. Like on my system, I've got 3 SSDs. I've got one that's got my Windows 10 installation, one that's got at this moment, it's Kubuntu 2104 installed, and then my third one's just where I store my stuff on my channel. And I tend to find that that's a lot better. The other downside to VM pass-through is that certain games block it. For example, anything that uses BattleEye anti-cheat, and again, another kernel level anti-cheat, despite the fact you're actually running a Windows operating system, it will detect that and it will block it. So that's another downside. If I'm honest, if you want to play games that just refuse to outright run on Linux, you're better to dual boot because you're not going to encounter any problems that relate to a VM or performance or anything like that. But yeah, to answer your question, I've not tried that myself. It's something I'm going to look into doing at one point, but as of the moment in time, no, I've not tried a GPU pass-through.
Wow, that's interesting. I wasn't even aware of the single GPU option. I didn't know that was an option now. I thought you still had to have, 2 GPUs, one that you could dedicate to your system and one to the virtual machine. So that's actually kind of cool.
The way I was going to say, the way it normally works is that as soon as you sign into your VM, it basically closes your installation of Linux. You can still SSH into it, so it's not closed completely, but there's no desktop environment or anything. And then you set it up so that once you close the VM, it boots you back into your your Linux installation again. Again, AMD hardware, I believe, still suffers, certain hardware anyway, does still suffer from the reset bug, so you have to physically reboot the machine, which, again, in that case, you might as well just do proper dual booting on dedicated hardware if you're going to have to reboot anyway. Right. But again, that's only third-party knowledge. I don't have AMD hardware, I have NVIDIA hardware. But from what I understand, I don't think NVIDIA suffers from that particular problem as much as AMD does anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you're willing to virtualize an operating system and you want to avoid those problems on your Linux distribution, then probably dual booting would be the most convenient route, at least. I would have to agree. That's probably a good idea. And speaking of Linux, I was actually wanting to know, how did you first get introduced to Linux?
Technically, I've only really been doing it again the last couple of years, but I think when Ubuntu Hardy Herring came out, that was the first time I got introduced to that. So
that would have been early 2008, I believe.
Yeah, that's probably about right. So at the time, I was transitioning between 2008. That would have been about the time Windows Vista was around, because I think Vista came out in 2006. So Vista was a train wreck. That's not mince words. Right. Windows Vista was an absolute train wreck, mainly due to the fact that a lot of the hardware at the time either didn't support the Aero interface or the drivers just weren't there. I've never seen an operating system crash so many times due to a graphic driver just decide to reboot itself. Anyway, so at the time I decided, I'm going to look at alternatives, and I came across Linux Mint. I thought, this is interesting. So I installed that, played with it for a couple of weeks, and then, strangely enough, I had Ubuntu after Linux Mint, and at the time it was Hardy Heron, which I installed. And I also tried OpenSUSE as well, because I thought, there's a Gecko there. That's funny enough, I actually had a leopard gecko at the time, so I thought, that's quite. Actually, come to figure, I don't think OpenSUSE is actually a gecko. I think it's more of a chameleon. But anyway, it's a lizard.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
But anyway, so I tried them all out, and I didn't stick with it simply because at the time the hardware support wasn't there. I had a laptop and a desktop, which for some reason I seem to recall something to do with the wireless card just wasn't there. There was not a driver available. Now, there was a way of supposedly fixing it, but it involves you extracting the firmware from a Windows driver. I just thought, like, it just isn't worth the hassle. So, yeah, I abandoned that idea and stuck to Windows. Windows 7 came out, fortunately, a couple of years later, so that was good. Windows 7 was a good operating system. Windows 8, what the hell were they thinking? It was it was like a Frankenstein machine. It was a cross between a tablet interface and a desktop. It
was like Xbox for your desktop. Was what it looked like.
It was. I was like, what are they doing here? So anyway, 8.1 came out and it sort of resolved the issue. Then Windows 10 came out, which, to be honest, for all its flaws, it's a pretty damn good operating system. Anyhow, so coming back to the present day, because I'm starting to ramble a bit. So we had Proton was announced in the back end of 2019, I believe it was, and I thought, this sounds interesting. So what I did is I bought myself a second-hand Dell laptop, stuck Ubuntu on there, and just, for someone that experienced something almost 10 years prior to that, was like, wow, things have really come along. So I did that for about half a year or so, and I thought, I'm going to take the plunge. So I bought a second SSD on my system, which had Windows 10 at the time. And I installed Manjaro, which was fine for the time being, but it had a tendency to break quite a lot. So I eventually switched over to Kubuntu, and that's what I've been using ever since. And that's my history of using Linux, really. Started in the early 2000s, decided it didn't support the hardware I needed at the time, revisited it almost 15 years later, and wow, what a contrast, and I've stuck with it ever since.
Yeah, it was quite a bit of work around that time still. It was quite a bit of work to get things going, especially Wi-Fi, and that kind of stuff. It was certainly not what it is today, that's for sure. So you got me wondering about SUSE. I think it is a chameleon. I don't know. It's one of those, is that what the ones with the little split hands is?
That is a chameleon, actually.
I think it is a chameleon, yeah. I got thinking about it. I'm not sure what that is, but yeah, sorry. Kind of my mind went off in that way when you mentioned it. I was like, what is that little guy on there? But all right. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. Where can listeners find your content online, all the different places?
The main one's my YouTube channel. So you can find me on YouTube, funny enough. If you search for Intelligent Gaming, I should be at the top of the results. If not, you'll probably autoplay a video and recognise my northern accent, so you'll know it's definitely me. You sometimes find me skulking around Reddit on some of the subreddits, such as funny enough, Linux Gaming's one of them, Linux for Noobs, the help Linux questions, and occasionally on the Ubuntu Reddits. So basically what I'm saying is you can primarily find me on YouTube, or if you want to find me a bit further afield, you can find me on Reddit. If you ever want to email me, not a problem at all. You can find all my contact details on the channel. But I'm happy to help you. If you want to drop me a line, that's not a problem at all.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really enjoy your content. I think I already said that. You do some really, really great stuff. So thank you again so much for being here.
No, I appreciate you. I appreciate you inviting me on here. I've had a good. It was short but sweet. But it was good. I've had a good time.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can join me on Locals at LibreQuest.locals.com, where I'll be posting exclusive interviews, some of my music, and other things, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about as well. For other ways to support me, you can visit LibreQuest.org, that's LibreQuest.org, and thank you for being a listener. Until next time, I'm Matt, and this is LibreQuest.